Snow began to drift down in clumps from the sky when Eric Thurgilson pulled Osrith closer to him. Before he even had to, she knew what he was going to say. "Prepared?" he asked in English. Osrith drew his saddle hand across her torso until it touched hers, which was now gripping buoy. And she was off, first, landing up to her ankles in freshly fallen snow, raising her sword as Eric swung their black mare around. There were two of them, one plump, a man around Osrith's height. The other was much taller, and he held a blunt-looking axe in his hand. They were coming to rob them, and they must be desperate, Osrith deduced. No attacker would ever come out on an evening like that to attack people on a horse. "Cymri?" Osrith asked. Neither answered, but their faces betrayed them. She and Eric were far into Strathclyde territory. People lived far from the sea on poorer land. Even if they hadn't met Norse, and Osrith supposed, by coming north Eric knew roughly where his brother and their army would be, a bad harvest could easily turn them into rivers. "I know where he will be," Eric replied, after Osrith had asked, after the Cymri had run, an hour later, not risking two warriors and swords apiece with merely tree branches with which to defend themselves. It had been a pity, Osrith thought as their horse picked out an otherwise invisible path in the snow. Not missing her hooves once, she could have done with letting her energy loose. She silently thanked Finolai for providing them with a horse who knew her way through Strathclyde. Osrith wriggled in the saddle a little with cold as a late afternoon wind buffeted them. To their right, the setting sun illuminated a hill foot which Osrith knew to be called Trusty's Hill, from the documents at Caeligwylid and a line drawing. "We will rest there. It is a cave in its hill. You may eat better there." They did eat better there. The hill foot consisted of a ring of mounds surrounding a central one, which had a hollowed-out center. Inside was perfectly dry and, as Osrith tied the horse and pulled the riding blanket over her back, Eric appeared with 2 handfuls of salted rabbit. "The salt comes from the wellies," he explained as Osrith strove to light a fire. Even shielded by the hill, the low temperature meant any fire she did start was going out almost immediately, and she continued to feed the fire with dry sticks that she found tucked away at the back of the hill cave as Eric cooked the animals until their juices ran clear, crackling into the fire. He passed a long, thin, hot steak to Osrith and she ate it with big bites, knowing the last time she had consumed hearty food had been the night before she had been tricked to the altar. God be thanked, Osrith was away from Caeligwylid now. Where they were going, that was the next question, and, Osrith considered, she could be in as much trouble with this Norseman than with Griogr and Abbot True. But it didn't feel it. He had gone with her, willingly. She had more of a chance surviving with her nominal enemy. "We make our camps here regularly," Eric explained, as he bit hungrily into his own rabbit. Osrith realized their strategy. Having several stashes of dry wood and fuel, the Norse could traverse quickly across land and keep strength in Orug to fight and defeat Saxons, Britons, Picts. Dimming light reflected off the beginnings of the river which was trickling through high ground to the west. Eric got up to tether the horse in shelter and she watched as he held out corn which he had recovered from the saddlebag, wrapped in cloth. Finolai again, and Osrith's heart softened to an ache as she thought again of her friend. If he had been clever enough to help her escape, he would have been clever enough to ensure that his role was not discovered. Osrith's eyes closed to a scene of white flakes heading swiftly downwards. It was not so cold, and the snow was fluffy and light, and in the morning it should be easy to ride through, past the small glen which would eventually be the Clyde, and get to Glashcu. They would be travelling northeast, towards Dunnottar and to the north. Osrith and Eric settled down to sleep, back to back in the warm earth dugout. Osrith's conscience was troubled by her selfish agreement. If the Norse won, she would have betrayed Domhnall. Her mind drifted to Tagged, and she shivered, and not from the cold though she wrapped her cloak around her tightly, but at the image of her handsome, hand husband, warrior at arms. It was selfish to bring the Norse to Domhnall, but she would have safer passage. And see Tagged again. And tell her Lord of Griogr. The soft twilight faded to blackness. There were no stars, presumably snow clouds were still shedding their burdens. Osrith shuffled to get comfortable on the hard floor. Her injuries, though healing, were sore. Eric moved away until she was still again. Did you really fight Norse? He asked. Yes. And you were there when Ivar Lothbrokson was killed? Domhnall killed him. It was still difficult for her to think of him as King Domhnall. I killed the man aiming for Domhnall, and he swung and Ivar was slain. That makes us enemies, then, as well as allies. Allies until we reach Dunnottar, Osrith agreed. This may be Trusty's Hill, a place ancestors of this land lived. If so, we are 2 days from Dunnottar. And it will be Yule, Osrith told herself, and in the snow and the cold there will be a battle. Osrith awoke to thick snow piles outside. Beyond, she saw legs pacing outside, and the sticks from the structure she had made on which to cook the rabbit the night before. She sat up, smiling as she slid off Eric's cloak from over her own. It was hard to know their direction in the whitescape. They were indeed at a Hillford, north of Strathclyde. It might well be Trusty's Hill, and Osrith imagined her ancestor, Arion, striding around here, inspiring his warriors to war, to join with the Picts, against the Angles at Ketterich. She stumped across to Eric, who was readying the horse, and offered him his cloak back. I've called her Sleipnir, Odin's horse, Eric explained, slipping it around his shoulders. Sleipnir had 8 legs and was as swift as the wind. We will have to be swift in this weather. It must have been an important sight, Osrith's mind insisted, as Eric helped her up, for Pictish carving in rock was exposed where Eric trod his boot, just like the line markings at Dund, and the rocks kept at Dunnottar that Constantine had stopped her from seeing. They rode northeast, the sun coming out behind them, melting the snow a little and making Sleipnir's way easier. My brother will want to hump you, Eric warned, his beard touching Osrith's shoulder and face as Sleipnir moved up a gradual incline. What of our agreement? Osrith demanded, shocked. I will tell him you sleep beside me. He will not understand our agreement. As they rode they talked a little. Eric told of Norway, a hard, frozen land for many months with only a short growing season. The reason for raiding, to Osrith, was obvious. We had a little sister, Eric continued. Sister, died of fever, bright, lovely. He fell silent and Sleipnir the sure-footed took them further north. What was her name? Osrith asked at length. Jida. When Siegfried first went Viking and I was too young, we played. She was close to me in age. He laughed, remembering. She always won when we played sword fighting, she was too quick. Her hair was bright yellow, it shone in the daylight. She always laughed at me for being too slow. Nothing made her slow. Eric pulled on Sleipnir's reins as they descended a slope. I went Viking with Siegfried, my first time. When we got back, Jida was dead. Osrith thought of a fair-haired girl fighting with her brother, and smiled to herself. Maybe if Uthed had not been betrayed by Elfric it could have been them. I do so hate to ravage, Eric continued. I think of Jida, what she would feel like if it had happened to her. They rode on. Snow flurried in the air, yet the sun was still out, yet weak. The flakes were melting before they landed. I have a brother, somewhere, Osrith replied. When Eric asked about her family it couldn't hurt and she stuck to her old lie. My family died before Dunnottar fortress under the blades of the Norse. I got lost and ended up in King's household. When was this? More than 2 years ago, Osrith admitted, falling back towards Eric as Sleipnir headed up to higher ground, and bore her legs into the horse's flank, flailing a little for the rein. Eric steadied her with his arm. Horses. Osrith still was not skilled enough with them. Ivar. It might have been him. Or Harold Finehair, but he usually raids the east coast. I rescued Constantine. King's son. He has hated me for it ever since. Men are like that, Eric said, by her ear. They do not like to be shamed by a woman. I am a man, I would be a man. Osrith declared. She could do what a man could, better than many men. You are a man to me though your body tells otherwise. You endured those terrible things to your body by people who were supposed to be your allies. But, they never broke your mind. You are like a Norse warrior. And, in that very cold day, As the sun began to sink, a burning pride at Eric's compliment glowed within Osrith of Bibbenberg.